Welcome to this explainer. Okay, today we're unpacking an incredibly dramatic, honestly almost unbelievable chapter of medieval history. We are looking at the Fifth Crusade. Now, when you hear crusades, you probably instantly think of battles in the Levant, right? Knights fighting over Jerusalem or Acre. But the Fifth Crusade? Well, this one was a completely different beast. It was this epic saga that literally shifted the entire theater of war straight into the heart of Egypt, right along the banks of the Nile. It's a story packed with surprising twists, ruthless political backstabbing, a heavy dose of environmental warfare, and ultimately, one of the most astonishing acts of mercy in military history.
So let's kick things off with a question that really gets to the heart of this wild campaign. How in the world did a sweeping, highly organized crusade invasion force turn into a stranded, mud-drenched army, completely trapped and literally waiting to be fed by their enemy? I mean, it sounds like something straight out of a Hollywood script, but this is exactly what went down between 1217 and 2021. To really understand this unbelievable paradox, we're going to trace their steps from the very first invasion all the way to the watery trap that finally ended it all.
Act 1. The invasion knocks on Egypt's doors.
So, by this point, the Crusaders realized that banging their heads against heavily fortified cities in the Levant just wasn't working anymore. So, they completely pivoted their strategy. The big new plan? Strike the Ayyubid dynasty right where it hurts the most, their wealth and power base in Egypt. In September of 1217, the Crusader vanguard gathers in Acre. The Ayyubid Sultan, Al-Adil, rushes over to keep an eye on them. And by January 1218, the Sultan has to make a brutal tactical choice. He actually orders his son to completely destroy their own brand new fort at Mount Tabor. Why? Just so the Crusaders couldn't capture it and use it against them. But then, the Crusaders pull a fast one. By May 1218, they bypass the Levant entirely, sailing straight for the shores of Medes, Egypt. The invasion of the Nile had officially begun.
And man, this strategy shift triggers an absolute domino effect of disasters for the Ayyubid defenders. After a grueling 4-month siege, in August 1218, the Crusaders finally breached the chain tower. Now, this wasn't just any tower. It was a massive fortification, literally sitting in the middle of the Nile, holding huge iron chains to block enemy ships. It was absolutely crucial. When the 75-year-old Sultan Al-Adil, who was sick in Damascus at the time, hears that the tower fell, the historical records tell us he actually died of immense grief and exhaustion. It's devastating. Instantly, his eldest son, Sultan Al-Kamil, has to step into this massive power vacuum. He rushes to Damietta just 10 days later, scrambling to hand out weapons and money, desperately trying to hold the city's defenses together.
Act 2. Crisis and Damietta's long siege.
Now, while Damietta is getting hammered from the outside, the biggest threat to the defenders was actually brewing right inside their own camp. This is a true dark night of the soul for the Ayyubid leadership. Because hey, nothing says medieval warfare quite like getting stabbed in the back by your own team while a massive invasion force waits outside, right? In February 1219, a commander named Ibn al-Mishtoub launches a full-blown mutiny. He wants to overthrow Sultan Al-Kamil and replace him with his brother. It's total chaos. To literally save his own life, Al-Kamil is forced into this dramatic midnight escape, fleeing his command center under the cover of darkness. Naturally, this sparks widespread panic among his troops, the camp is abandoned, and the Crusaders just stroll right in the next day without swinging a single sword, giving them a devastatingly close foothold right up against Damietta's walls. This whole leadership crisis was a disaster, and they needed a fix, fast. Just 2 days after losing that critical camp, Al-Kamil's brother, Al-Muazzam Isa, rides in from Damascus to the rescue. He doesn't waste any time. He marches straight up to the coup leader, Ibn al-Mishtoub, and exiles him to the Levant right then and there. It was a brilliant, decisive move that immediately unified the Ayyubid emirs. But even with the mutiny crushed, they were still in deep trouble. Knowing the Crusaders might suddenly pivot again and march on Jerusalem, Al-Muazzam Isa makes an agonizing call. He orders the dismantling of Jerusalem's own walls. He figured, if we can't hold it, we definitely aren't letting the Crusaders use it as an impenetrable fortress.
So, with the internal politics finally settled, the siege just grinds on. And here we see this staggering, almost surreal contrast in human behavior. On one hand, you have sheer brutality. In July 1219, Crusader forces absolutely massacre roughly 2,000 Muslims during a clash right outside the walls. But then, right in the middle of all this horrific bloodshed, St. Francis of Assisi shows up. He traveled all the way from Italy, crosses enemy lines, preaching peace, and actually secures a sit-down meeting with Sultan Al-Kamil. And the Sultan? He welcomes him.
He shows him immense hospitality, patiently listens to him preach, and then gives him safe passage back to the Crusader camp. It is just a mind-blowing moment of interfaith connection right in the middle of a total war zone. Now don't think for a second the Ayyubids were just sitting quietly behind their walls. Oh no, they hit back hard with these massive, bloody counterattacks. In August 1219, at the Battle of Faraskor, Muslim forces totally crushed the Crusaders' vanguard. We're talking over 6,000 soldiers killed, mostly Spanish knights and volunteers. And then, just a couple of months later, in October, at the Battle of Barulas, they intercepted a huge flanking maneuver. The result? Another 10,000 Crusader casualties. Just devastating, heavy blows that really crippled the Crusader army in the short term.
But despite absorbing those staggering losses, the Crusaders just wouldn't let go. For 18 agonizing months, the people trapped inside Damietta suffered through relentless siege warfare, widespread famine, and rampant disease. Finally, by November 1219, the heavily depleted, starving Muslim garrison is completely overrun. Damietta falls, the city is brutally sacked, and suddenly, it looks like the gateway to the rest of Egypt has just been kicked wide open.
Act 3. The Watery Trap of Mansoura.
Okay, so the Crusaders have Damietta, but then they end up wasting over a year and a half just bickering amongst themselves. Finally, by July 1221, their army, which was feeling pretty overconfident and getting pushed hard by the papal legate, decides to march south toward Cairo. But they were totally blinded by hubris, and they marched straight into a spectacular disaster. Sultan Al-Kamil decided to use the environment itself as his ultimate weapon. He had set up a defensive camp further south called Mansoura. The Crusaders stupidly positioned themselves right between two branches of the Nile. And that's when Al-Kamil springs his trap. Timing it perfectly with the flood season, his forces open the dams and canals of the Nile. Boom! The water rushes in, completely flooding the Crusader camp. Instantly, they are trapped in this massive sea of mud and rising water, and their supply ships behind them are entirely cut off. Literally overnight, the entire invading army is paralyzed.
Which brings us to our final chapter, the victor's nobility and the campaign's end.
So there they are, utterly at the mercy of the environment, freezing in the mud and rapidly starving to death. The Crusader leadership realizes it's over. They've been completely outplayed. The entire campaign collapses right then and there. They practically beg for peace, which leads to a sudden 8-year truce. After years of brutal fighting, they are forced to the negotiating table with absolutely nothing left to bargain with, except their own lives.
The capitulation was as absolute as it was swift. The terms were simple. The Crusaders had to immediately hand the city of Damietta right back to Sultan Al-Kamil. Both sides exchanged hostages to make sure the deal stuck, and they officially signed that 8-year peace treaty in August 1221. This grand, terrifying invasion force that had planned to conquer all of Egypt and secure the Holy Land, they were now signing away every single thing they'd gained just for the right to leave the country alive.
But here is where this explainer takes its most incredible turn. While all that paperwork was being finalized, remember, there were still 30,000 Crusader soldiers physically stuck out there in the mud, starving to death. Now, in medieval warfare, you totally expect the victor to just let them rot, or worse, slaughter them all. But Sultan Al-Kamil does the unthinkable. He dips into his own personal treasury to buy food, and he personally feeds 30,000 starving enemy soldiers. He saves them from the famine and the mud. It was an astonishing, almost unheard-of act of mercy that absolutely stuns the entire Crusader world.
And you know, we don't just have to rely on the Ayyubid historians to know this happened. We have the emotional, written validation from the Crusaders themselves. Oliver of Paderborn, he was a scholar and secretary embedded right there with the Crusader army. He actually wrote this historic letter of gratitude. He explicitly praised the unique and noble character of Sultan Al-Kamil for keeping them alive when he so easily could have just wiped them off the map. It completely cemented the Sultan's legacy of grace, even among his bitterest enemies.
So we're left with this lingering thought. The Fifth Crusade was this massive, grinding conflict defined by terrible bloodshed, brilliant strategy, and just awful suffering. But when the dust settled and total victory was fully in his hands, the winner chose humanity. It makes you wonder, will history remember Sultan Al-Kamil more for his tactical genius with that watery trap at Mansoura, or for his profound mercy in feeding 30,000 defeated men? For us today, I think it's an incredibly powerful lesson in leadership. It really makes you reflect on the harsh consequences of hubris, the real power of diplomacy, and what true strength actually looks like. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and as always, keep questioning history.